Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling uncomfortable without knowing why? Nothing bad was said, nobody raised their voice, no argument happened. And yet, something felt wrong. It's a strange feeling, the kind that lingers in your mind long after the conversation ends. Most people dismiss these moments. They tell themselves they're overthinking, being paranoid, reading too much into things. But what if that feeling isn't irrational at all? What if your brain is quietly noticing patterns before your conscious mind catches up? Because here's something fascinating. Human beings are far more predictable than they like to believe. And once you understand how intentions reveal themselves through behavior, you'll start noticing clues hidden in plain sight. Not because you've learned how to read minds, but because people constantly reveal who they are through the choices they make. Today, we're exploring how intentions hide beneath behavior, why people are often more predictable than they realize, and how learning to recognize patterns can completely change the way you understand the people around you. Now, imagine you're sitting across from someone you've just met, right? The conversation is pleasant, they're charming, funny, confident, everything appears normal. But every time the discussion shifts away from them, they quickly redirect it back. Every story somehow ends with them being the hero. Every disagreement becomes someone else's fault. At first, it doesn't seem important. In fact, you might barely notice it. But your brain notices. Research into human behavior has revealed something interesting. People tend to repeat the same psychological habits across different situations. The way someone behaves during a casual conversation often mirrors how they'll behave during conflict, friendship, business, and even relationships. Small behaviors are rarely isolated events. More often, they're previews, tiny trailers for a much larger movie. The challenge is that most of us focus on words, and words are easy to control. Behavior is much harder. Think about how often people tell you exactly who they are. I'm loyal, I'm honest, I'm trustworthy, I care about people. The problem isn't that they're lying. Many genuinely believe these things. But intention and self-image aren't always the same thing. Human beings are remarkably skilled at creating stories about themselves, stories that make them feel consistent, reasonable, good. Yet actions often reveal a different reality. Someone may describe themselves as dependable, but they're always late. Someone may claim they're supportive, but they disappear whenever things become difficult. Someone may insist they value honesty, but they become defensive whenever uncomfortable truths emerge. Eventually, explanations matter less than repetition, because repetition creates patterns, and patterns create predictability. In fact, predictability is one of the reasons advertising works so well. People like to imagine they're completely independent thinkers, but much of human behavior follows familiar paths. Once people develop a certain view of themselves, they tend to make choices that reinforce that identity. A generous person often finds new opportunities to be generous. A bitter person frequently finds new reasons to feel wronged. Someone who believes they're superior often seeks situations that confirm that belief. It's as if people become trapped inside the stories they tell themselves, and the longer those stories exist, the more predictable the behavior becomes. This is why intentions can often be spotted long before actions become obvious, before someone manipulates, before someone betrays, before someone supports, before someone helps. The clues are usually already there, hidden in the small choices, the repeated reactions, the familiar patterns. One of the most revealing things you can observe is how people behave when they don't get what they want. Anybody can appear patient when life is going their way. Anybody can appear kind when they're receiving praise. Anybody can appear calm when nothing challenges them. Pressure changes everything. Pressure removes filters. Pressure exposes priorities. When frustration arrives, hidden intentions often become visible. Does the person take responsibility? Or do they immediately search for someone to blame? Do they become aggressive, withdraw, manipulate, make excuses? Research repeatedly shows that stressful situations tend to amplify existing personality traits rather than create entirely new ones. Which means difficult moments aren't interruptions, they're revelations. Now consider another situation. You're at a restaurant. A cashier makes a mistake. Nothing major, just a simple error. How does the person react? Do they remain respectful? Do they become impatient? Do they suddenly treat someone else as if they're less important? Well, moments like these reveal more than many people realize. Because when there's nothing to gain, authentic attitudes become easier to observe. People often display their true character in situations where status, rewards, and appearances are removed. After all, it's easy to be polite when impressing someone. It's harder to be respectful when no reward exists. And that's exactly why these moments are so valuable. They're windows, brief glimpses behind the curtain. Here's something even more interesting. Intentions don't usually appear overnight. They emerge gradually, almost invisibly. A person rarely wakes up one morning and becomes dishonest, or selfish, or manipulative. The process tends to happen in small steps. A small lie becomes a larger lie. A tiny act of selfishness becomes a habit. A minor excuse becomes a permanent pattern. Researchers who study habits have found that repeated behaviors often become increasingly automatic over time. This means today's small choices frequently become tomorrow's personality traits. And that's why paying attention to little things matters, because little things rarely stay little forever. The problem is that many of us ignore early warning signs, not because we don't see them, because we don't want to see them. We prefer potential over evidence, promises over patterns, hope over observation. We've all done it, right? We've all met someone and thought, they'll change. They didn't mean it. It was probably a bad day. And sometimes that's true. Human beings aren't machines. Everyone has bad moments. Everyone makes mistakes. But when the same behavior appears again, and again, and again, well, at some point it stops being an exception. It becomes information. And perhaps the most useful question you can ask isn't, what kind of person is this? Instead ask, what consistently motivates this person's behavior? That question changes everything, because suddenly you're no longer judging, you're observing. You begin noticing what happens when they're challenged, what happens when they're ignored, what happens when they're successful, what happens when they're frustrated, what happens when they're afraid. The answers reveal patterns, and patterns reveal intentions, far more accurately than words ever could. The goal isn't becoming suspicious of everyone you meet. No, it's becoming more aware. The more clearly you understand human behavior, the less likely you are to be blindsided by it. You stop relying on promises. You stop relying on appearances. You stop relying on first impressions. Instead, you learn to trust patterns. And patterns have a remarkable way of telling the truth. Because people are constantly communicating who they are. Not through speeches, not through carefully crafted explanations, not through declarations about their character, but through repeated choices, day after day, moment after moment, until eventually the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And once you start seeing those patterns, you'll realize that predicting people isn't magic. It's observation. Thank you genuinely for spending these few minutes with me. If you enjoyed this exploration into human psychology and human behavior, I'd truly appreciate it if you left a like and subscribe to the channel, because it helps more people discover these conversations and supports the creation of future videos like this one. Until next time, stay curious, keep observing, and remember, people may hide their intentions, but their patterns rarely do.